Let me move ahead. Lined up is the keynote speech, ladies and gentlemen. Before I introduce or invite our keynote speaker, please note that rather than just doing with some formalities of holding sessions and deliberations, we have looked to reaping something very substantive out of all the deliberations, because you can see it's reflected on the panelists, the distinguished members in the panels and moderations who represent success, leadership themselves, and they have a lot to share from their expertise and experience. And please note that in course of the past few months, we have held pre-conference sessions and also some concept advisory meeting, which have been crucial in deriving and devising the content and the course throughout the 7 sessions spread across the day today. So what we're ultimately looking forward to is reaping something substantive in black and white, something research-based or something substantive to be submitted to the policymakers. So that's why we all are looking forward to your very proactive participation. Said that, ladies and gentlemen, let me now steer you to the most important part, one of the most important part of this inauguration session, that is the keynote presentation, which will be, which is an effort to explain to you the theme, re-engineering management, survival, revival, and growth. That's what the conference is dwelling on. And my pleasure and privilege, ladies and gentlemen, now to invite the keynote speaker, Dr. Bindu Nath Lohani, who is the former Asian Development Bank's vice president and was in charge of ADB's Departments of Economic Research and Regional Cooperation, Sustainable Development and Climate Change, and Information Systems and Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please join our hands as I welcome Dr. Lohani to the podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, the President of MAN, Secretary of the Finance, dear friend of mine, ladies and gentlemen, especially today the CEOs, it's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to be invited to share a few views that I have on some of the issues that you are likely to discuss today. The topic, engineering management, survival, revival, and growth, I think is timely, but we probably need to look at this issue even over a longer term perspective. I used to be a member of MAP. This is the Management Association of the Philippines. This is my first interaction with MAN. Very happy that we have a very, very active MAN in Nepal. But this is my first time to get to know you on this one. Most of my life has been in the global and the regional issues. So I will try to look at this theme today from that perspective and see whether they will be and how much of these will be relevant to the local conditions. In the context of the local situations, you all know it better than me, so I also take this as a learning session for me. If I had to pick about 3 big global issues, priorities, crisis, challenges today, I would pick the following 3. Of course, the first, the COVID pandemic, its impact on just about everything, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. Second, the sustainability, climate change issues. Every country has committed that they will go for carbon neutral world by 2050. In the case of Nepal, we have committed by 2045. This is a challenge. This is also an opportunity. The third, the global turbulences. We see the geopolitical conflicts, alliances, impacting on the economy, impacting on the financial systems, and shifting the country alliances of all of those. So all of these become very relevant issues for the CEOs today, also become very relevant for the countries. Now, these global concerns are definitely creating regional and local concerns. That requires companies, CEOs on one hand, on the other hand, the countries as a whole will require to address them in several ways. Now, let me today pick about 5 ways that we could probably do that. I've been mostly in the global companies, in the global boards, and what I see them doing is they all are rethinking, revisiting their strategies, both in the medium term as well as in the long term. They all are doing that. And I sit in some of the board, I see them doing that. Engineering business process and making adjustment to that. That's the basic that we could do. And CEOs have a lot of authority to do that on their own. Making changes beyond re-engineering. Changes which are transformational. It's really significant changes which they hadn't seen in the past. Fourth, the opportunities for new growth. There are new growth areas in the world today where we do have opportunities. And finally, many of the companies that at least I've seen in US in one of the board, I said, they see this as an opportunity to really get to the next level of businesses in future. And I'll come to that a little later. Now, we don't need to talk a lot about the COVID-19. Everybody knows about it. But one thing we know that it had impacted quite a bit. In 2001, myself with a few other experts, Nepalese expert, and the Silicon Valley people who were doing the global thinking, we created a document called Strategy for Making Nepal Stronger and Resilient. Of course, it'll have the impact, but then we were thinking not of the immediate action that you would need as relief and etc., but what could be how could you look long term? And in that publications, we look at the impact of the pandemic on various key economic sectors. Now, you will know this, that there was some net positive impact, net positive. And the companies who work on health, I'm talking globally, chemicals, materials, personal care, ICT, agriculture, and energy, they all had positive net impact of COVID. The ones which had the negative impact, of course, which we know in Nepal very well, the tourism and the leisure, the aviation, the mobility, construction, manufacturing, banking, financial services, educational sector, the areas which the CEO conference has picked rightly, in my opinion. Now, in that publication, we also looked at specifically some Nepal-related concern, like tourism. I think if I remember, the secretary would know better, contributes about 7 to 8% to the GDP. So it's a very significant sector. The manufacturing, regrettably, is a bit small here, 5%. They were affected the most, which we know. But agriculture, which is about close to 30% of the GDP maybe, but 70% of people employed, they were affected very low. Now we know the reasons for that. Now, we also interviewed many of the companies in Nepal, and what came out from the survey was nearly half, about 50% of the business owners in Nepal have seen their revenues drop, which is, but you knew this, but about 50% of the companies admitted to that. Almost a very significant amount of the companies said they had problem with the workforce and cash flow, which also is not surprising. Many firms expected, almost 47% of the companies in Nepal expected that, can you hear this? There's some vibration here, that the banks will help them. Even the central bank would help them. I don't know how much of that happened, how much that could not happen. We know the story very well. And majority of the companies also had a problem with the workforce issues, which again we know. Now, against this background, the survival, revival, and growth becomes very important. That's why this topic, I say, is very, very timely. Now, I say this, that conquering the crisis requires actions with strategic imperatives. Now, this is a word we use globally, strategic imperatives. Now, what does that mean? Such actions need to be highly leveraged on one hand and be systemic, that's to me strategic, and should be must-do commitments which are imperatives. So action need to be taken in a manner where the strategic imperatives becomes a driving force for achieving the aspiration on one hand, and other hand, transforming to address the impact for the future. I mean, this is a concept we utilize quite a bit in some global companies. Now, what can you do when you have a crisis like that? I saw the Asian financial crisis, I saw the tsunami crisis, and a few others in Asia-Pacific region. It always has about 3 phases. First, the response phase. When something happens like earthquake, you keep on responding. You don't think anything like that. Immediate actions to mitigate the losses or the impact. I think we've just about done that for the crisis of the COVID. Then you try to reset the economy, phase number 2. Recover to return to the same normal if you can. If not, you go to a new normal. I think most people think we may have a new normal, right? And I think we have done quite a bit of that, but we're still a little bit on that. And the third phase will be to rebound, build the growth pipeline to accelerate the growth strategy. And I think this is what we need to do. We haven't done much yet, and many companies globally are doing this. I wouldn't say all of them have completed the job. Now, the options that we have, of course, the re-engineering business, which we said, you can change the business processes, but this is hard, but it must be done. But normally, if you go to the business school and take your textbook, normally say, business process re-engineering, you got to do once in a while regularly. But we forget to do this. And we wait until the crisis to happen, and I hope we don't forget. I hope the CEOs don't forget that we wait for the next crisis to do the business process. I think I have forgotten also in the past myself that I said, okay, it's all done, and I'll wait for the next crisis. I hope the COVID has taught us a lesson that we need to do this before the crisis come to us. I've also seen in my lifetime many re-engineering management projects failed. And I'll pick only 3 today. I got about a list of 10, but I will pick 3. One, most of the time, it failed because the organization inadvertently, not knowingly, adopted a flawed or an incomplete re-engineering strategy. I've seen this happen many times. Too quickly, you start thinking, this is it. Right? The second, we often are tied to our old thinking, old processes. This worked before. The technology, we saw tied to the technologies. And I think this has been sometimes the reason for failure. And third, most of the time the management forgets to make a long-term commitment. Okay, the crisis is not only this crisis, we got to think about the next 10 years, and which we forget. I won't tell the other reasons. So we all agree the COVID is changing the business practices in and out. The workplace practices have changed, digital e-commerce has changed, education has changed, health services, the way we do has been changed, travels have changed, et cetera, et cetera. So against this light, in one of the global study, where I was partly involved, we asked the CEOs globally, this is global data, and 90% of these CEOs believe that the COVID-19 crisis will fundamentally change the way we will do the business in the next 5 to 10 years. And this crisis presents, they also say, most of them said that this crisis presents an opportunity to not only innovate, but also leverage the same for a profitable future. This is the CEO's global thinking. I think this should also be applicable here. But history suggests that organization, I saw this during the financial crisis. When I was the Vice President of Finance, I had this job for the Asia-Pacific region. I saw these organizations that invested in innovation during the time of crisis outperformed quite a bit. So this, again, a lesson that we probably could keep our mind. Now, talking about the opportunity for growth, again, globally, if you look at it, 70% of the CEOs think the areas where we can make a lot of money, where growth will be, one, the technology, consumer packaged goods, medical, financial service, healthcare, and communication service. These are the areas they think are, and then in one of the companies that I'm sitting in, they're making a lot of investment in these, thinking that we're gonna make a lot of windfall profit in the future. This has also given us an opportunity to think, where are the new growth opportunities? Now, one area that I think, in which I work quite a bit, is in the green economy. There's a lot of money, $100 billion committed by the donors to be given to the countries for climate change, green investment, and so on. I think there's also lots of grants money. The Secretary of Finance know all of this. We haven't tapped enough. I think there's a huge potential to tap this free money available there, turn them into the green business. The other area where I see is lots of potential, where we have a young population, smart young people, is in the digital space, sharpening the focus on digital technologies. I read one document, I liked it, Digital Nepal Framework Report. And it says one nation, 8 sectors. It includes all the sectors that CEOs are gonna discuss here today, health, education, et cetera, et cetera. And it says 800 activities that we could undertake. And it says it has the potential to create new wealth of 800 billion rupees. Now would be what, close to about 2%? I don't know, close to about 2% of the GDP, which is a lot. In a time of crisis when there's a negative global growth, 2% is a lot. So this is one area where I think we have a lot of potential. Now in this CEO conference, I look at, you have 7 areas. Now in my 50 years of life in the Asia Pacific region, I had worked in most of these areas. I feel like commenting long on these, but we don't have the time. But nonetheless, I will mention 1 or 2 in each sector. That really, very hard to do that. Pick 1 or 2 is very difficult than picking 10. One of the things that is missing in the discussion, I think, is the sustainability issue. You can't get away from the sustainability, climate change, and sustainable development issue. Anything you do in any of the sectors, we have to keep that in mind. This is required. Now, if you look at the 50 years of Asia's development, you will find all of these sectors were very important in their development, in their country's development. Priorities, investment in infrastructure, energy, transport, water, investment in digital technology, investment in education, skilled Tibet education, health, FDI, not only for money. Sometimes I think the discussion I read in the press is FDI means bringing money. Most of the Asian countries not only brought money, they didn't want just money, they wanted technology and knowledge with it, so that you can upgrade your investment and thinking, so you could be competitive with the others in future. Now, I like to say 1 or 2 words only, because time doesn't permit, on each of these sectors, because I work on all of the infrastructure. If you look at the Asia-Pacific region, the infrastructure investment in Nepal is the lowest. Lowest. I mean, compared to any other Asian countries, which also means that if you do not invest in infrastructure, the poverty reduction, it has direct relationship with poverty reduction, direct with the GDP growth. So I think we have a lot to do. This is we know, but we need to do more. But the way we do infrastructure has to be different. It's no longer brick and mortar. It's not only steel and iron or cement and concrete. It is doing infrastructure that will have an impact on the beneficiaries, whether it will have reduce the poverty, reduce the GDP, will help the tourism, will help the energy sector. It has to be a infrastructure development with a purpose. It has to bring in new technology and quality. I have to say this, it hurts me. I haven't seen, except for a few hotels, I haven't seen an iconic infrastructure like you see in Asia Pacific region here. What is the iconic bridge here? What is the iconic building here? Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. You need to climate-proof every infrastructure. This is And we need to do financial engineering, not only look for the budget from the Ministry of Finance. He has already got a difficult job. How do you leverage that money with the private sector? I prepared a report with the CNI on this, found out that the private sector investment in infrastructure is next to zero. I won't say that, this is probably too negative, maybe very low. Because whereas I see in the energy sector in Asia Pacific region is about 50%, ICT much more. We need to have more private sector engagement to leverage the budget which the government provides. Education. My favorite on the education is, since I was a professor once for 10 years at the Asian Institute of Technology, quality, quality, quality. If we can arrest these people going for undergraduate education in the other countries, just the undergraduate, we save a lot of money. And this is doable. This is doable by linking with the university, participating with the other universities, and in the Asia Pacific region, they have done it. 30, 40 years ago, they all used to send the students outside. Now they can do at least the undergraduate themselves. And get the TVET skilled people who will be available at home and also for outside. In the banking financial sector, a lot of expertise here, I won't comment, but something that I feel, and I hope I'm wrong on this, maybe we have too many banks. I think that's and too small maybe sometimes. If you have to fund a $300 million project, I don't know how many banks could do this. So we need to think of this from that perspective. I think the role of the government becomes important. Say, how do we help them to make a bigger pie in that business? And and secondly, I also see that many of the companies, again, I hope I'm wrong here, because local condition I know less, too dependent on banks, or over-dependent on banks. And that is also a stretch on one hand to the bank. On the other hand, we're not exploring the debt capital market, which we've been saying for a long time. And we have seen this happen in the Asia Pacific region in a very good way. Now, I won't talk in the other sectors. I have something on the health that I would like to say, which is, in the COVID time, I couldn't go for a health check anywhere else except I had to do it locally. So I hope if we can do all treatment, most treatment locally, that would be a big plus to the economy, number one. I also am a strong believer that the poor people always suffer, so if we have a universal health insurance system somehow done, it'll be a very good thing to do for the country. Right? I would like to make sure, my dream someday before I die, that most people Nepalese will not go to Bangkok, to Bumrungrad, or to Medanta or Apollo to treatment. I'll say, I'll just go to the hospitals here in Nepal. That's my wish list. Hope it happens while I'm alive. And now I don't want to talk much more on these sectors. I may join some of the group. It is really interesting for me. Now, globally, therefore, to conclude, we look at many priorities globally. I talk about the global turbulence as my third issue. On that, I would mention only three things that we notice globally. One, the biggest concern is inflation globally and the interest rate. It's also true. I think everything has gone up. And what we can blame is because of the energy prices, because of the war, or it is because of the supply chain management sector, whatever it is a very big issue. The second thing that is worrying globally is the supply chain management, supply chain delivery. There's a lot of disruption that happened during COVID. So what companies are doing at the moment is, in the past, when you make an iPhone, you could get parts from Mexico to other places and assemble in China. Today, they are thinking, which will be my closest neighbor, closest country from which I can get it? Because the disruption is too wide because of the COVID. You had a lot of disruption. So they are looking for closer proximity for the supply chain, which means the price could increase too, and the availability might take some time. And the third issue, once again, I say this again, is sustainability and climate change issue, which becomes really, really important because we need to live in this earth. 1.5 degree has been promised. Today we are in the track for 4 to 5 degrees centigrade. I think we may not see 1.5, but we want to make sure our next generation sees a 1.5 degree world. That's 2050. By 2050, I'm gone. I'm not in but I want to see this happen for others. Thank you very much.